If you're watching Justice After Dark, comment below what you think, because this is the moment my life stopped pretending and finally told the truth. My name is Victoria. I'm 27, and the night everything split in two started with a family dinner I never asked for. When I walked into my parents' house that Sunday, the place didn't feel like home. Folding chairs and borrowed tables were jammed into every corner. There were 33 relatives packed inside, all dressed like they were attending a church banquet. Every single one of them turned to look at me, like I'd walked into the wrong room or maybe the wrong life. No one hugged me. No one said they were glad I came. A few people barely nodded, then went right back to their conversations, like I was some stranger who'd wandered in off the street. I should have turned around and left right then. Instead, I walked in deeper and sat in the one empty chair at the far end of the table. Food was already being passed around. Plates were full. No one asked if I wanted any. No one shifted to make room. I just sat there, listening to them laugh about promotions, weddings, baby showers, every milestone I apparently didn't qualify for anymore. Then my mom stood up. Ella walked over to the wall where all the perfect family photos were lined up. Graduation pictures, holiday smiles, the ones where I still looked like I belonged. She grabbed the frames that had my face in them and ripped them down, one by one. Glass clinked as they hit each other, and the entire room went silent. She dropped my pictures straight into a trash, they'd conveniently placed right beside the table. Then she said it, loud enough for everyone to hear. That I was a leech. That I'd suck this family dry. My dad didn't stop her. He didn't even look uncomfortable. He stared right at me and demanded I pay back every dollar they'd ever spent raising me, said I was nothing but a wasted investment. My sister shoved her chair back and stood up. She didn't say a word. She just pointed toward the door, the way someone escorts a problem customer out of a store. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I picked up my bag and walked out of the house they had just erased me from. I called a ride and went back to my apartment. They thought that was the end of it. They had no idea I'd been quietly tracking what they were doing to my name and my credit for months. And they didn't realize that dinner was the final push. I needed to turn their perfect little image into the kind of legal revenge they'd never see coming. When I got back to my apartment, my hands were shaking, but not because of what they said. It was because of what they had confirmed. They didn't see me as a daughter anymore. I was a line item. A debt. Something they believed they still owned. I dropped my keys on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and went straight to my laptop on the kitchen table. I didn't text anyone. I didn't post anything. I opened a blank document and typed one sentence at the top in all caps so I wouldn't forget why this mattered. This is not about hurt feelings. This is about what they did to my name. As the screen glowed in the dark apartment, I started replaying everything I knew about my family. My mom, Ella, is a senior loan officer at a local credit union just outside Austin. The kind of person who reminds you she understands money every chance she gets, especially when she wants control. My dad, Gerald, is co-owner of a heating and air company, proud of building it from nothing, and even prouder of reminding me how expensive it was to raise me. My older sister, Mallory, is a guidance counselor, the kind you see smiling on school brochures, posting inspirational quotes online. Soft voice, clean image. We are the Brooks family, the polished Texas household, matching Christmas sweaters, perfect group photos at barbecues, graduations, church events. Offline, it was always different. When I told them I was going into UX design instead of accounting or nursing, Ella called it a phase and asked when I planned to get a real job. Gerald joked in front of everyone that I was the artistic one, which in his voice meant irresponsible. When I was in college, Ella insisted I open a joint bank account with her. She framed it as concern, said it was just to help manage my bills so I wouldn't mess up my credit. I was 19, exhausted, and juggling classes and work. I signed whatever she put in front of me without pushing back. She set up the online banking on my laptop herself, saved all the passwords. Then she told me not to change them, saying she was the one who fixed things whenever I forgot to pay. At the time, it sounded responsible, helpful even. Years passed, I moved to Austin. I got my own place, my own job, my own routine, and still she held onto everything. She had my social security number memorized. She insisted my mail should keep going to their house because it was safer. I thought it was just control. I didn't think it crossed a legal line. Not yet. A few months before that dinner, a letter showed up from a bank I'd never heard of, thanking me for applying for a personal loan. I assumed it was junk mail and tossed it. Then another envelope came. This one talked about a new line of credit. Around the same time, the free credit score app on my phone sent an alert. My score had dropped. It didn't make sense. I paid my one credit card on time. I stayed current on my student loans. Nothing I was actively using explained that hit. I took a screenshot. I told myself I'd call someone. Then work deadlines piled up. Meetings filled my calendar. I let it slide. That night, after the dinner, I didn't let anything slide. I went straight to annual credit report and requested my file from every bureau. While the reports downloaded, I forced myself to sit still. I slowed my breathing. I let the anger burn down just enough so I wouldn't rush or miss details. When the PDFs opened, it felt like harsh fluorescent lights snapping on in a room I'd only ever seen by candlelight. There were accounts I didn't recognize, loans I never applied for, opened in cities I'd never lived in, all tied to versions of my name and my old address, my parents' house. Small personal loans, a store credit card, a line of credit that had been maxed out, then rolled into a consolidation loan. The dates lined up perfectly. With the years, I'd been too busy to read every piece of mail they forwarded to me. The mailing address on almost every account was my parents' home. The phone number on several of them was Ella. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, waiting for another explanation to appear. Something random, something impersonal. Nothing did. I created a new folder on my desktop and started dragging everything into it. Credit reports, screenshots from my phone, photos of old envelopes I'd saved back when I thought they were just strange spam. Then I grabbed a notebook and started writing down account numbers by hand. I circled every single one that listed my parents' address instead of mine. After that, I went to the government website for identity theft and followed each step carefully. I filed an official report explaining that someone with access to my personal information and my old joint account had opened lines of credit without my consent and routed everything through an address I no longer lived at. I answered every question like I was speaking to a jury. When that was done, I placed fraud alerts with each credit bureau. Then I froze my credit completely, locking everything down so nothing new could be opened in my name without layers of verification. Only after all of that was finished did I open my design software. If there was one thing I knew how to do, it was take a messy story and make it impossible to ignore. I built a simple infographic, nothing flashy, clean icons, bold numbers, short, clear lines explaining how identity theft can start inside your own family. I didn't use any names. Not mine. Not theirs. Just patterns, warning signs, and one quiet line at the bottom that said, "This had happened to me." I saved the file under a generic name that didn't scream revenge, exported it. Then I sat there, staring at the finished image. They thought keeping everything in the dark would protect them. I was done leaving anything in the dark. The next morning, my phone looked like it had been through a wreck. My lock screen was nothing but missed calls and stacked text previews, one on top of another. It started with my dad around 5:00 a.m. call after call, like persistence alone could drag me back under their roof. By 7, my sister took over, 20 missed calls and a flood of messages about how I'd embarrassed the family and how I owed mom and dad an apology. By 10, my mom joined in, not with the anger from the night before, but with long paragraphs that started with, "We need to talk calmly about this," and ended with, "Please pick up just once." I stood in my kitchen wearing an old t-shirt, watching the numbers climb. Every vibration tightened my chest. I didn't open a single message. I just took screenshots of the notifications, one by one, and saved them to the same folder as the credit reports. The same place I'd put the receipts, the patterns, the proof that they only reached for me when they needed something, or when they realized they'd finally gone too far. I made coffee, sat at the table, opened my laptop again. The infographic from the night before was still there. Clean lines, simple colors, quietly screaming that this kind of thing can start inside your own family. I uploaded it to an anonymous account on a large discussion site in a subreddit focused on personal finance and credit. The title was straightforward. My family used my identity for years. Here, what I wish I'd noticed sooner. I attached the image, wrote a short caption about someone close abusing access to personal information, and hit post before I could talk myself out of it. Then I did something similar on LinkedIn. That version was toned down, framed as an educational post about red flags and the importance of monitoring your credit. I stripped out anything that could point directly back to my parents. I wasn't looking for public drama. I was looking for pressure. For a while, nothing happened. I answered a few work emails, pushed a prototype update to my team, pretended my life wasn't actively falling apart. Then the notifications shifted. People started commenting, asking questions, sharing their own stories, parents, spouses, relatives opening accounts behind their backs. It was comforting and unsettling at the same time, realizing how common this really was. One direct message stood out. The username was generic, but the message felt uncomfortably familiar. They thanked me for posting, said the layout made everything easy to understand. Then they added one line that made my skin prickle. Some of this sounds exactly like what my sister has been doing to the family. A minute later, another message came in from the same account. "Victoria, is this you?" I froze. There aren't many people who know I do both UX work and side design projects. Even fewer who could recognize my layout style from a single infographic. I stared at the screen for a long moment before finally typing back, asking who it was. The reply came almost immediately. It was Janine, my mom's older sister, the accountant, the one who always looked slightly out of place in family photos, like she'd been added at the last second. She asked if we could talk somewhere that wasn't the group chat my mom used to flood with holiday plans and fake cheer. We switched to a private call. I stepped out onto my tiny balcony while morning traffic hummed below. Janine's voice sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. She told me she'd seen my post on LinkedIn first. Then she found the same graphic reposted on Reddit. She said something in her stomach dropped the moment she connected the two. A couple of years back, Ella had helped her restructure some debt after a rough stretch with freelance clients. Janine said she'd signed a stack of paperwork because Ella told her it was just consolidating credit cards into one payment. Janine figured it was easier to let the family money expert handle it. But recently, letters had started showing up. Notices about a loan Janine swore she'd never taken. When she asked Ella about it, my mom brushed it off as a clerical error and told her to ignore it. While Janine talked, I opened a new file on my laptop and started typing everything she said. Bank names, rough dates, dollar amounts, the exact phrases Ella had used. Then Janine stopped. Very quietly, she asked, Victoria, did she do this to you too? I told her everything. The credit reports. The accounts I never opened. My name still tied to my parents' address years after I moved out. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Slow, careful, like someone realizing a suspicion they'd buried for years was finally undeniable. She said she'd never trusted how Ella pushed herself into everyone's finances, but she'd convinced herself it was just control, not something illegal. I thought I owed her for helping, she admitted. Now it feels like I paid with interest I never agreed to. We agreed she'd scan and email every piece of paperwork she could find, every letter from collectors, every notice Ella had told her to ignore. When we hung up, I had a new pile of puzzle pieces and a much clearer picture forming. This wasn't just about me. This was a pattern. My phone buzzed again, a call from my dad, then my mom, then a cousin. I watched their names light up my screen and let every call ring out. For years, they acted like I was draining them. Now I was starting to see how many people they'd quietly drained to keep up the image of a successful, generous family. I turned my ringer off, opened my files, and started building a timeline. One that didn't care about holidays, bloodlines, or hurt feelings. It only cared about dates, amounts, and signatures. 2 days later, Mallory texted me like nothing truly catastrophic had happened. Just one line at first, asking if I could meet her for coffee near downtown so we could talk like adults, as if I'd been the one ripping photos off the wall. I almost ignored it. Then she followed up with, "It's about mom and money, please." That second sentence did what 33 relatives glaring at me couldn't. It made me curious. We met at a cafe a few blocks from my office. Plants hanging from the ceiling, overpriced cold brew, the kind of place meant to feel calm. Mallory was already there, tucked into a corner booth, her school lanyard shoved deep into her purse. Dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept since the dinner. When she saw me, she tried to smile. It didn't last. I sat across from her, wrapping my hands around a mug just to keep them steady. For a moment, we didn't speak. Two people with the same last name, sitting in silence, both pretending we didn't know how broken things were. Finally, she said she was sorry about how the dinner went. Not sorry for what she did, just sorry it got out of hand. She blamed stress, the economy, pressure on mom and dad, as if any of that explained being pushed out of your own family like you crashed a stranger's party. I let her talk until she ran out of excuses. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table. Inside were copies of my credit reports, every account I never opened clearly highlighted. I told her I was filing an identity theft report, that fraud alerts were already placed on my credit, that regulators and the banks were about to start asking questions she wasn't going to like. Her face went pale as she scanned the pages. My name, over and over, linked to our parents' address. She tried to explain it away, said Ella had just been helping, that mom knew how to get better rates, that this was how families handled money when they trusted each other. I asked her when trust started meaning signing someone else's name on a loan. That stopped her. I pointed to a mid-sized loan opened 3 years earlier. Then another credit line that had been rolled into a consolidation loan. All of it tied back to my old joint account information. All of it using my social security number. Then I showed her the email Janine had forwarded to me. The one where Mom reassured her that a strange letter from a lender was just a mistake and should be ignored. Mallory read it once, then again, her eyebrows pulled together not in shock but in recognition. I asked her directly if Mom had ever used her information. She hesitated, just long enough to answer without saying a word. Finally, she admitted there had been a few times Mom had handled things for her too. Moments when Mallory was overwhelmed starting a new job and didn't want to deal with paperwork. A small consolidation. A refinance Mom called a harmless cosign. She said she'd signed where Mom pointed, initialed where she was told. It was easier than reading every line. As she talked, I opened my laptop and pulled up my notes. I asked if she remembered bank names, approximate dates, amounts. She did. Too many of them matched the lenders from Janine's letters and the accounts on my own credit report. It stopped looking like isolated favors and started looking like a system. The more Mallory reached back into old memories, the more they lined up with the pattern already forming in my head. Mom would step in during a crisis, offer to fix everything, gather signatures when people were tired or stressed, then quietly redirect just enough money to cover whatever she and Dad needed next. Business debt, renovations, new equipment. When I mentioned Grandma Marion, something flickered across Mallory's face again. She said Mom had handled everything when Marion sold her house and moved into independent living. Every meeting, every phone call. Mom showed up with a neat check at the moving party and told everyone the rest had gone to fees and taxes. Mallory said it never felt right, but whenever she asked questions, Ella snapped at her for being ungrateful. I kept typing as she talked, building a rough timeline. Year 1, I start college, joint account with Mom. Year 2, Janine's freelance work dries up. Mom steps in. Year 3, Grandma sells her house. Year 4, Dad's HVAC business suddenly has a new truck and a remodeled office. On paper, it was numbers. In real life, it was guilt, pressure, and years of Ella reminding everyone how much they owed her. When I told Mallory I'd already filed with the FTC, her eyes widened. When I explained that Mom's own credit union would be forced to investigate once they saw how many loans traced back to employees' relatives, she finally stopped trying to spin it. She stared down at the table for a long moment. Then, quietly, she asked what I planned to do next. I told her I was going to talk to a lawyer, not to punish the family for the sake of it, but to protect myself before their mess burned down my financial future completely. And if that meant dragging the entire rotten structure into the light, then that was exactly what I was going to do. Mallory swallowed hard and promised she would send me every email, text, and screenshot she had that involved Mom and money, especially anything tied to Grandma or Janine. She admitted she didn't want Mom to go to jail, but she was exhausted from living with that sick feeling that something was wrong and that she had been helping hide it. As we wrapped up, my phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. Attached was a blurry photo, my dad standing next to a classic-looking HVAC truck, grinning with a beer in his hand. The caption read, "Funny how fast that upgrade showed up after Grandma sold the house, huh?" It was from my uncle on Dad's side, the one who had always half-joked about Gerald forgetting where the family money came from. I showed the picture to Mallory. The last piece of denial fell from her face. On the bus ride home, I sent an email to a consumer rights attorney. The name had come up multiple times in forums about financial abuse. I attached a summarized version of my timeline, the documents I had collected so far, and explained plainly that what started as a humiliating family dinner had turned into a trail of signatures, loans, and missing money, all pointing back to the same two people. My parents had thought that night would be the end. They believed they had publicly cut me off. What they actually did was hand me the final clue. I needed to follow the money straight back to them. A week after meeting Mallory, my mom showed up at my office. I found out because the receptionist sent me a message. "Hey, there's a woman here asking for you. Says she's your mother." I walked out to the lobby and there she was, hair perfectly styled, blazer pressed and sharp, clutching a leather folder like she was about to close a big deal. She smiled wide, the same smile she used on Neighbors and at church. "Victoria," she said, standing as if we were colleagues meeting for a friendly check-in. "Can we talk?" I glanced at the receptionist and at the cameras in the corners of the lobby. Then I said, "We can talk right here. No closed doors." Mom didn't like that, but she sat anyway. She started with a carefully measured apology, the kind you give when appearances matter more than the damage done. She said things had gotten heated at the dinner, that everyone was emotional, that she didn't mean every word she said. Over and over, she circled back to how hard things had been for her and Dad, how much pressure they were under, how ungrateful it felt when I walked out in the middle of a family gathering. I let her talk until her real reason for being there became clear. "I saw something online," she said, her voice dropping a notch. "Some infographic about families and identity theft. People are talking. I need to know what you've been saying about us." There it was, not "Are you okay?" Not "Did I hurt you?" Just, "What are you telling other people that could make my life harder?" I told her exactly what I had done. That I had posted an educational graphic about what can happen when someone abuses access to another person's financial information. That I hadn't used names, hadn't mentioned locations, hadn't pointed to anyone directly. Then I told her the part that mattered most. I had filed an official identity theft report, and I had frozen my credit. I told her that banks and regulators were going to start asking questions about what she had done with my social security number and our old joint account. The color drained from her face. For a moment, the practiced, calm tone she'd carried slipped. "Do you have any idea what you've done to my career?" she snapped. "To this family." I told her I had a very clear idea of what she had done to my credit, to Janine, and probably to Grandma. Before I even submitted any reports, I had pulled a printed summary from my bag and slid it across the table. It wasn't everything, just enough to show I wasn't guessing. Dates, lenders, amounts, the same home address appearing again and again. My mom stared at it, jaw tight. "You don't understand how this works," she said, finally trying to regain control. "I know people at these places. I know how to structure loans so they look good on paper. I did this to help you build credit, to help Janine, to help Mom. Nobody was complaining until you decided to make a spectacle of it." I reminded her that real help usually involves explaining to someone what they're signing up for, not forging signatures, and telling them to ignore collection letters. I mentioned the email Janine had, where Mom called a serious notice a clerical error. I outlined the timeline of money flowing into her accounts and Dad's business right after major family events. Her eyes flashed. For a moment, I thought she might actually yell in the lobby. Instead, she leaned forward and lowered her voice, and that was worse. "You are my daughter," she said, as if that gave her some legal authority over my life. "We do not take each other to court. We do not drag family business in front of strangers. You want your credit fixed. I'll fix it. I'll make a few calls, move some things around, but you need to stop whatever you've started. Take down whatever you posted. Tell whoever you talked to that it was a misunderstanding." Behind her, my boss, Trevor, had stepped out of a meeting room and was pretending to check his phone. He was close enough to hear everything. I looked my mother in the eye and said no. I was not deleting anything. I was not calling this a misunderstanding. I was not going to help her bury this just because she was afraid of what it might do to her job title. She sat back, eyes cold now. "If this blows up, it will hurt all of us," she said. "Do you really want to be responsible for that?" I told her she had it backward. She was the one who had been signing her name on other people's lives for years. I was just finally writing my own. She stood up fast enough to knock the leather folder against the table. "You're making a mistake," she said through clenched teeth. "When this comes back on you, don't come running to me." Then she walked out of the building, heels clicking on the tile like a metronome, without even looking at Trevor. After she left, Trevor came over and asked if I was okay. I gave him a slightly sanitized version, enough to explain that uncomfortable calls might come into the office. Instead of stepping back, He offered to loop in the company's legal counsel if my mom tried to show up again, or if anyone began harassing me at work. That small gesture, someone believing me immediately, felt like oxygen. Over the next couple of weeks, the ripples started spreading. Janine sent me scans of everything she could find: loan documents with suspicious signatures, payoff statements that didn't match her memory, emails where mom had told her not to overthink the numbers. With my permission, my attorney forwarded some of the documents to my mom's credit union's compliance department. They were already investigating because of the identity theft report and the unusually high number of loans linked to relatives. Now, they didn't just have red flags, they had a clear pattern. A state investigator called me for follow-up questions. There were no flashing badges, no dramatic showdowns, just a calm voice on the phone, walking through dates, accounts, and confirming that I had never authorized any of it. Every time I answered, no, I felt the balance tip a little further in my favor. At night, when the anger kept me awake, I started building something new. The infographic had done its job, but I wanted a place for people to find concrete steps if they were going through the same thing. I created a simple website from scratch, clean, quiet, and functional. A landing page explaining how financial abuse and identity theft can happen inside families, links to government resources, a section where I broke down my story into anonymized case studies. No names, no locations. The facts were sharp enough on their own. I watched the traffic tick up slowly as people shared the site in forums and private groups. Some were strangers, some were relatives. A cousin I hadn't heard from in years emailed me from a personal account, saying the layout of my case study felt uncomfortably familiar and asking if she should pull her own credit reports. I told her yes. Meanwhile, the messages from my parents shifted. Anger gave way to silence for days at a time. Then, sporadically, my dad would send texts about family sticking together, about outsiders trying to tear us apart. By outsiders, he meant auditors and investigators who didn't care about the family name. He was right about one thing: something was tearing us apart, but it was the people asking questions. It was the answers. It took months for the consequences to catch up with them, which somehow made it feel even more real. This wasn't a dramatic movie moment with cops bursting through doors. It was slow, quiet, like a fuse burning under the floorboards. First came the formal letter from Mom's credit union, the same institution she had boasted about working at for over 20 years. I received a copy through my attorney. They were conducting an internal review of multiple loan files connected to her and indicated they might reach out to me for verification. A week later, another envelope arrived from the state regulator's office. They requested permission to use my complaint and all supporting documentation as part of a broader investigation. I signed every form. I wanted every possible flashlight pointed at what they had been doing. I didn't see most of what happened next in person. I heard it in pieces. It was like watching a house you once lived in being torn down from a few blocks away. Janine was the first to go through an official interview. She described sitting in a conference room with 2 compliance officers and a lawyer, her hands folded so tightly in her lap they ached. She walked them through every favor Diane had done over the past 5 years. The consolidation loan, the refinance, none of it fully explained. She described the times Diane had told her to ignore letters because these companies make mistakes all the time. They showed Janine documents with signatures that didn't look like hers. They asked if she had ever given Diane permission to sign on her behalf. She said no. They asked if she had ever received the full amounts those loans supposedly provided. Again, no. Grandma Marion's part came next. Frail and unable to sit through long meetings, her deposition was arranged at her independent living center. From what her lawyer told me later, Marion cried when she saw on paper just how much money had passed through Diane's hands when her house was sold. Proceeds she had never seen. Fees no one had explained. She had trusted her daughter to look out for her. Instead, it looked like Diane had prioritized herself and Gerald's business first. Somewhere in the middle of all this, my dad tried his own damage control. He called one afternoon, launching into a speech about outsiders, trying to tear the family apart, about investigators who didn't understand how families help each other off the books. I told him calmly that forging signatures and rerouting loan proceeds didn't count as helping. He switched tactics. Could you just tell them it's a misunderstanding, that you overreacted? I said no. He hung up. The official fallout began with Mom's job. Her credit union placed her on leave, the polite way of saying, "Don't come back while we figure out how deep this goes." Coworkers she had known for 20 years were suddenly auditing loans she had personally processed. Many of those loans had familiar last names, cousins, in-laws, even mine. The pattern wasn't subtle. Then came the civil case. Janine and Grandma's lawyer filed suit, not just against Diane, but against both of my parents, arguing that they had benefited from money obtained through fraud and misrepresentation. My name appeared in the filings as a victim of identity theft and unauthorized credit accounts. My attorney asked if I wanted to attend the first hearing in person. I thought about it for a long time and said no. I didn't need to sit in a courtroom and watch my mother pretend she didn't recognize her own handwriting. Instead, I signed an affidavit, notarized it, and let my words speak for me. Mallory went in my place. She texted afterward. She had never seen Mom look so small. Diane and Gerald showed up with their own attorney, dressed as if it were Sunday at church, not the beginning of the most humiliating chapter of their lives. From what my lawyer described, their defense was exactly what I expected. They leaned heavily on the idea of family arrangements, verbal promises, helping relatives through tough times. They argued that misunderstandings and sloppiness, not intent, had created the mess. But every time they tried to frame it as a string of accidents, the evidence didn't cooperate. Numbers didn't match. Signatures looked wrong. Timelines were far too convenient. Money flowed in exactly when their business needed a boost, when they wanted a new truck, when they were remodeling, or right after another relative had signed documents they didn't fully understand. The investigators in court didn't care about holiday photos or church attendance, or who brought what to Thanksgiving. They cared about documentation, about Mom's login showing up on loan files tied to relatives, about the notes in the system where she praised a strong relationship with borrower, while the same borrowers, like Janine, sat across from them and said, "I did not agree to any of this." Eventually, the credit union made its decision. They fired Mom for violating multiple internal policies and reported her to the state. Her license was suspended while they decided whether she would ever be allowed to work in that field again. All those years of bragging about understanding money ended with her being escorted out of a building she once treated like her second home. On the civil side, my parents settled before the case could go further. They agreed to repay the money that should have gone to Janine and Grandma, plus additional damages. Every loan opened in my name, and Janine's was unwound and removed. They didn't do it out of conscience. They did it because their lawyer explained that fighting it would bring even more scrutiny, maybe even criminal charges if the wrong prosecutor got involved. They didn't have the cash to cover it all. So they did what people like them always swore they'd never have to do. They sold the house in the suburbs, the one with the wall of family photos that no longer included me. They sold the miracle truck Dad loved posing with. They sold a portion of his business, bringing in a partner who, according to one cousin, made it clear he was there to fix the mess, not protect Gerald's pride. News travels fast in a family like ours. Some relatives were furious with me at first, convinced I had overreacted, that I had gone nuclear instead of keeping it in the family. Those same relatives went quieter once letters arrived at their doors, encouraging them to check their own accounts for irregularities. A few reached out privately to thank me, even if they would never say it out loud at a reunion. The last time Dad called me, it was late. His voice was rough. He said I had destroyed everything, that the family was broke, that Mom might never work in her field again, that people at church were whispering. He told me he hoped I was happy, living my little independent life while they suffered. I listened until he ran out of words. Then I told him the only thing that felt true. I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped covering for what they had been doing for years. The hole they were standing in, they had dug it themselves. I had just finally stepped out of it. He went quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller. "I never thought it would go this far," he said. I told him it had gone this far the first time Mom signed someone else's name on a loan. The only difference now was that someone had finally turned on the lights. A few more months passed, and the version of my family that existed online and in my childhood memories finally stopped matching the one that existed in real life. Word filtered back to me in pieces. My parents had moved out of the big suburban house and into a cramped rental on the edge of town, the kind of place you drive past without really noticing. The yard Dad used to obsess over was gone. The wall of framed family photos had been packed into boxes. Neighbors they had impressed for years barely got a goodbye. For a while, Mom tried to maintain appearances. She dressed for job interviews in the same blazer she had worn to my office, but doors kept closing. It turned out she had been officially terminated after the internal investigation. Not exactly something that looks good on a background check for financial positions. She picked up part-time work wherever she could find it, nothing close to the prestige she once bragged about. Dad retained a share of the HVAC company, but it wasn't really his anymore. The new partner came in with spreadsheets and conditions, not family dinners or handshakes. An uncle told me Dad hated answering to someone else, hated justifying every expense, hated the whispers about why he suddenly had to sell assets. For the first time in my life, the consequences were landing on them instead of the people they had leaned on for years. Mallory transferred to a different school district after rumors about her parents began to spread. One night, she sent me a long text. She said she was angry and embarrassed, tired of feeling like she had to choose between loyalty and honesty. She didn't apologize directly for that night at the dinner, but she said she understood why I had stopped laughing at family jokes years ago. I told her I didn't need her to pick a side. I just needed her to stop pretending that what happened was normal. We aren't suddenly best friends, but there's less static between us and more quiet honesty. Janine and I talk more now than we ever did growing up. She sends me pictures of her dog and updates about Grandma Marion, who is now doing physical therapy and managing her money on her own terms for the first time in years. Grandma even wrote me a shaky letter, thanking me for not letting them make me small. She said she wished she had spoken up sooner in her own life. I keep that letter in the same folder as all the ugly documents, a reminder that not everything that came out of this was destruction. Some of it was correction. As for me, my life didn't magically turn into a montage. I still pay rent. I still answer to a boss. I still wrestle with anxiety some nights. But my credit reports are clean now. The fraudulent accounts are gone. The freeze is still in place, this time by my choice. I got a small raise at work, not because of what happened with my family, but because I showed up, did the work, and refused to let their chaos drown me. The website I built about financial abuse and identity theft inside families started getting more attention than I expected. Strangers emailed me to say the case study helped them stop a parent from opening a loan in their name, or gave them the language to finally talk to a spouse about money. On weekends, I take on a few extra design projects, turning dense legal information into something ordinary people can understand. It feels like reclaiming something my mom had twisted and using it for the exact opposite purpose. I wish I could tell you there was a neat, happy ending where my parents apologized, actually meant it, and we all shared some awkward but healing holiday dinner together. That didn't happen. They are still angry. They still talk about me like I burned the house down instead of pointing out that it was full of leaking gas. Maybe that will never change. What has changed is me. I no longer measure my worth by the approval of people who only saw me as an investment. I no longer hand over my passwords, my signature, or my peace of mind just because someone shares my last name. If there's a lesson here, it's this. Love and loyalty do not mean letting people use you as collateral for their bad decisions. You can care about your family and still protect yourself from them. You can be hurt and still choose to go through the front door of the law instead of sneaking around in the dark. And if you have even the smallest feeling that something about your finances doesn't add up, you are not paranoid for checking. Pull your reports. Ask hard questions. Write things down. The people who truly love you will want the truth just as much as you do. The ones who don't may call it betrayal when you finally turn on the lights. But sometimes, turning on the lights is the only way to see who is actually standing next to you and who has only been using your shadow. Victoria. Justice After Dark.